Welcome to this podcast episode from the Historical Society of the New York Courts. My name is Chris Kwok. I'm a mediator and arbitrator at JAMS and a board member for the Asian American Bar Association of New York. I'm joined today by Judge Randall Eng, former Presiding Justice of the Appellate Division, Second Department. He's currently of counsel at Meyer, Suozzi, English, and Klein, PC, and Trustee Emeritus of the Society. Welcome, Judge.
Thank you. Good morning.
Today, we're going to be discussing the Honorable Randall Eng's life and work. And it's truly a historic one and one that we should learn from and to know about. And so it's a really wonderful, a chance to really get a sense of history and of the community that we're part of as lawyers and also as Chinese Americans and also as Asian Americans. Judge Randall Eng has many, many firsts in his career. First for me, as a Queens kid who grew up in Flushing, Judge Randall Eng was the first ADA anywhere in New York State. And he was an ADA in Queens. And he started in 1973. And that was when many of the post-65 immigrants from Asia started coming to Queens. But Judge Randall Eng's family has a longer history. He's part of a different wave of immigration to this country. And why don't we just get into it? Judge Randall Eng, welcome again.
Thank you. Thank you again.
Yeah.
Well, so, you speak of early waves of immigration. My mother, who is presently 98 years of age, was born in the United States. She was born in Cleveland, Ohio, in 1923, and she tells me that her family was one of the first 8 Chinese American families in the entire city of Cleveland. My father immigrated to the United States in 1937 at the age of 15 to join his father, who was already here. And my father served in World War II in the United States Army Air Forces, and he flew in B-17s out of England. My mother had a interesting childhood in that at the age of 9, she and her family returned to China from the United States in the depths of the Depression. I say an unusual story because of the irony of it. We all know that because of discriminatory immigration practices, many Chinese Americans were denied entry to the United States, even though they had a legitimate right to be in this country, being the children of citizens and other statuses. However, when my mother's family returned to China, they were escaping the Great Depression in the United States.
That was why they went back to China.
That's why they went back to China, because they thought that life would be easier in China. And my grandmother was very fearful of my grandfather dying and leaving her with 5 children and penniless. So they went back to China in 1933. However, they began to return to the United States gradually. First my grandfather, and then my uncle, and then an aunt. But my mother and her younger sister remained with my grandmother. She didn't want to come back to the United States because life was too hard for her. And they stayed with her through the end of World War II.
Were they in southern China?
They were in southern China. They were in Toisan. They were in Guangdong province in Toisan. And fortunately, despite the economic hardships, they survived the occupation of southern China by the Japanese.
And then
my parents met in China after World War II. My father went back to China to get married, so he went back to his village. And as I understand it, the village matchmakers said, "Here's a perfect couple over here," and that is that. He, of course, has been in the United States as a veteran and wants to return to America. My mother was born in America and speaks English and knows something of the U.S. culture, a perfect match.
When
And they
your
were married for
mother,
72 years.
when your mother went back to China, did she speak Chinese fluently?
Oh, yes, she did, because her
Oh,
parents spoke Chinese.
I see. I
But
see.
she didn't read or write it.
Okay.
However, she went back at age 9 and was able to learn written Chinese. So
Wow.
she was and is completely bilingual.
Right. Fascinating. And still
Yes,
alive and still with us. So it's amazing. It's great.
yes, she is. She's 98 plus.
And where is she right now? In
She's
Queens?
in Queens. She's living in an assisted living center near where her home was. So this
Where's that?
way, her
Where's that?
neighbors or former neighbors can still see her.
Oh, wow. Where is that in Queens?
It's in Kew Gardens.
Kew Gardens.
Yes, and she came from she had a home for 52 years in Briarwood, just
Mm,
south of Grand Central Parkway.
right. And is that where you grew up? So you were born, where were you born?
Oh, I actually was born in Canton, now known as Gwangju, and
Mm.
that's because my parents married in China, and we
Oh,
wanted to return to the United States, but there were many delays in travel, so I was born there. But I
mm,
was brought to the United States, brought to Queens at the age of 6 months.
mm. And so did your parents move to Queens because like, oh, it's a nice area. We got we can grow up in a house, like why did they choose Queens at that point? That's in the 40s, right?
That was in 1948 when they
48.
returned to New York
Right.
and Queens in particular. And actually, they chose Queens because my father was raised first in New Jersey and then in Queens. His father, my grandfather, had a laundry in Richmond Hill, Queens,
Mm.
and I think he liked the area, and he bought a business. He bought a laundry and a dry cleaning shop in Queens, which he opened in 1949. So he was attracted. They were attracted to Queens.
Where were those businesses located?
They were in Jamaica.
Jamaica.
They were in Jamaica. I grew up literally in the shadow of the Jamaica courthouse on Sutphen Boulevard, literally.
The presaging what would become your life would become later on.
Yeah, 8811. And I was assigned there as a judge for 5 years down the line. We have a family picture of my mother holding my sister, my younger sister, and myself with the courthouse in the background. And my sister became a lawyer as well. So you talk about the irony of history and of pictures. So we grew up in the shadow of the courthouse.
So before we get to sort of your eventual sort of becoming a lawyer in your career, tell us a little bit about your childhood and growing up in Queens and how that was.
It was an experience that was subdivided into several categories. And that is that we attended public schools. When my sister and I were in PS 82 in Jamaica, Queens, for the 6 years that I was there, we were the only non-white students in the entire school. There were no persons of color, there were no Asians, there were no African Americans, there were no other persons of color in the school. We had a house. My parents bought a house in 1951, among the first Chinese American families to buy a home, and certainly in Queens, and we were the only Asians in the neighborhood. So we were surrounded by neighbors with Irish and Italian surnames, and we got along very well. My parents have always been congenial and reasonable, and our neighbors were reasonable. We had a happy childhood growing up in that neighborhood of Jamaica, but contrast that with the business, my father's laundry and dry cleaning business. We were, again, in a legal community. We were 2 doors down from the Queens Bar Association. There was a law office upstairs over the laundry. There was a law office across the street. So at that time, we were surrounded by lawyers. And the population, the community, was largely Jewish. So we had an interesting situation where we were the only Asians anywhere, and serving a community of predominantly Jewish customers, and living in a community predominantly Irish and Italian, with Catholic heritage. So it was an interesting mix. And of course, all our relatives were Chinese. So
Right.
it was an experience.
So let's go to law school. You go to law school, still pretty close to home, right?
Yes, I went undergraduate to State University of Buffalo, and I enjoyed it. I had a good undergraduate experience, and I was accepted at the Buffalo Law School because of the tuition and the Regents scholarship availability. I could have gone tuition free there.
Hmm.
But I thought about it, and I spoke to some mentors, and I thought it would be a better idea if I had my legal education in New York. The chances of having any kind of a reasonable legal career in the Buffalo area was slim, and it was thought that I would probably benefit from a legal education in New York, where I would be making my way.
So you go to law school in
I went to St. John's.
St. John's Law School. So
St. John's
still
Law
very
School.
close to Jamaica, and it's really almost next door as well, right?
Well, it is. However, I was the last class to start and finish in Brooklyn. I remember having to drive by the Queens campus with the law school under construction in order to get to school. I didn't want to wait a year or two to start.
Oh, I had no idea that it was in Brooklyn at the time.
Yeah,
so you were like, look at that building. I could have gone to law school there 5 minutes away from home, but here I am going to Brooklyn.
Yes. Well, St. John's was in Brooklyn at the time, on Skirmorn Street in Brooklyn Heights, and among the other schools I was accepted at was Brooklyn Law School.
Oh.
I chose St. John's. Partly because they had the only Asian American law faculty member anywhere, and that was Professor Kenneth Wong, who taught contracts and corporations, among other subjects. And I thought St. John's was a hospitable place at the time for Asian American students. There were very, very few Asian American students in law school at that time, the late 1960s, early 1970s. The demographics were completely different.
Right.
In my section of 150, there was only another Chinese American student and myself as the only persons of color, and there were 6 women. So you could see the tremendous change now in the demographics of the law school population.
Are you noticing the beginning of the immigration of the new wave of Asian immigrants to Queens at that time?
Well, as far as waves of immigration, I would say from 1980 onward, the number of Asian American students in the law schools has expanded tremendously, and not just Chinese Americans, Korean Americans, Vietnamese Americans. You're seeing a broad representation of Asian groups in law school. My sister had a career as a school psychologist first, went to law school a little bit later, and I could just see from the makeup of her class the tremendous changes in the law school population.
So you graduate from law school, and take us from there.
All right, graduated from law school. That was in 1972. And I wanted to begin a career in the private sector in the law. And as people had cautioned me before I started law school, not many opportunities for Asian American new lawyers in the private sector. I got a few interviews, not much interest. I was denied interviews that I thought I might have qualified for. And then it was mentioned to me that, well, why not try the public sector? And I said, well, I will do that. And I applied to, among other things, all of the district attorney's offices in the metropolitan area. No interest, except in Queens. And I was appointed by then District Attorney Thomas Mackle in 1972. And I became an assistant DA in 1973 upon admission to the bar. So it was an opportunity. It certainly was. There was no interest among the other DAs nor in other public sector opportunities, but I I had an interest in criminal justice, and it just happened to come together in that public sector, more open-mindedness in employing persons of color, and my interest in criminal justice. So I was there for 8 years. I left as a bureau chief in the Long Island City Trial Bureau. There were 5 criminal parts then in that courthouse in that period of time.
So that brings us to about 1980.
1980, exactly.
What do you do then?
In 1980, the correction department had beckoned. Now that's because an assistant DA in Queens, who later became a Supreme Court justice, Larry Finnegan, had taken a position as the Inspector General of New York City Correction, and he needed a deputy. So recalling our experiences together and thinking I might have interest, and I did, he appointed me the Deputy Inspector General of the Department of Correction, involved with departmental disciplinary matters, investigating complaints of violence against inmates, and generally involved with the integrity of the office. He left to take another position in city government, and I was appointed by the Commissioner of Correction then, Benjamin Ward, as Inspector General. And I held that position for 2 years until 1983.
And then what after that?
1983, I was appointed to the New York City Criminal Court by then Mayor Koch. And I was all of 35 years of age at the time. But Mayor Koch had a vision of shaping the bench into the 21st century, which he did. Some of his appointees are still on the bench. Yes, after all that time, because he liked younger appointees. Also, he liked people from his city administration. Correction is part of the city administration.
He's like, you guys do government, you can do this. Yeah.
Yeah, he liked former prosecutors. So I fit the bill.
Yeah.
And as an aside, in 1983, the correction department, the city government, wanted to build the White Street Jail in Lower Manhattan as a replacement for the Tombs. Well, you can imagine how upset the Chinatown community was by that. And they had demonstrations, a march on City Hall and everything else. So I think at that time also to deflect some of the criticism, the administration looked at me as a judicial appointee to try to deflect some of that criticism. So when all of those things came together, I was appointed a judge of the criminal court.
And how long did you spend on the criminal court?
I was in the criminal court from 1983 to 1990, when I was elected to the Supreme Court in Queens. I served on the criminal court for about 5 years and made an acting supreme in the late 1980s, and then elected in 1990 to a full term.
So that in time brings us around the time to 1988, when the New York State Judicial Commission on Minorities, as it was known then, and it was led by Franklin Marshall, for whom the commission is now named, and it held hearings on the status of minorities in the legal profession. Can you tell us a little bit about your memory of those hearings in that time?
Well, there was a genuine paucity of minorities in the law, in the judiciary, in the district attorney's offices at that time. Things were just beginning to turn around. But I have to say that in Queens, the first African-American Supreme Court justice was only elected in, I think, 1970 or 1971. There had been no black Supreme Court justices prior to that. In 1990, when I was elected, I was the first Asian to be nominated in Queens. Peter Tom, who was elected in New York County, and I were elected the same year in 1990, but we were the first to be elected. I do remember that those hearings focused on the low representation of persons of color in the legal community, and then they traced it all the way back to low numbers in law school and and paucity of persons of color in decision-making positions, certainly in city legal agencies, on the bench. It was a problem that was multifaceted, and it continues today. We saw the Chief Judge's recent report was more optimistic, but certainly showed that there was much to be done.
Now, the commission, the New York State Judicial Commission on Minorities, and its hearings became the impetus for the creation of Ebony. There had been separate Chinese American bar associations and in separate Korean American bar associations. How was the Chinese American Bar Association and the vibrancy of it at that point? I'm not that familiar with the history.
Well, the associations had relatively few members. I think it was difficult in order to get a critical mass of lawyers of Asian background at that time. That's why the formation of Ebony was more useful in that area, because it pulled together Asian American lawyers from all backgrounds. Up until the 1980s, the number of Chinese American lawyers in New York was probably somewhere around a dozen. I think I knew everyone personally until the early 1980s. Growing up, the only Chinese American lawyers that I knew were in Manhattan, Chinatown, and they were solo practitioners for the most part.
And they served the Chinese population of China.
That's it. They did immigration work, some transactional work, and never went to court. They weren't litigators. So I think that Ebony, of course, was formed in recognition of these issues. I can remember being at some early meetings. Judge Denny Chin was our host for several of those early meetings, and Judge Doris Lynn Cohan, and let's see who else, Rocky Chin. Yeah, so a handful of really motivated and energetic people.
Right, and Ebony, of course, today is one of the largest and most well-run sort of minority bar associations, in large part to all the hard work of the founders, presidents, members, and of course of Yang Chen, the current executive director.
Yes, he's been a very dynamic executive director. Yes.
Right, but tell us a little bit about sort of the growth periods, because there were up and down periods for Ebony.
Well, that is so. Yeah. That is so. You have to, of course, see the timeline here. Early on, you had a lot of participation from persons involved in governmental work, such as myself. And then you had persons who were doing work with the Human Rights Commission, agencies like that. And then slowly you began to see the participation of those in private practice in mainstream firms. You could just see it. You could just see the gates beginning to open. You saw more people coming from the firms, and from firms of increasing prestige and name recognition, and you saw that they were motivated to have an organization that could coalesce around. You also had active judiciary committees that were involved in identifying candidates, Asian American candidates for judgeships, vetting those candidates, advancing them. Our early dinners were modest affairs. I can remember being at, I think it was the Peking Park restaurant, Park Avenue in the 40s. And then from there, the events grew larger and larger, and we needed larger and larger venues until we are at our present stage, where we, until the pandemic, hosted events seating hundreds in high-profile venues. And regarding the ups and downs of the fortunes of Ebony, of course, things are always tied to leadership. So we've had in our past leaders of great effectiveness and leaders of not so great effectiveness. So I think that the results reflect that to some degree, and the fact that that Ebony has remained a prominent and readily recognizable is a great tribute to those founders and those who have perpetuated the good name of Ebony.
Yeah, and Ebony's growth, along with finding the right leaders at the moment of growth, of course, also grows with the increasing numbers of Asian American attorneys. The children of the post-65 immigrants, that went to law school in large numbers, and as they began to come into the field, they found leaders like yourself from the old school, so to speak, that were practicing sort of like a little bit lonely for a long time, but then increasingly, I think you saw waves and waves of new Asian American lawyers, and I think that also sort of, increased the vibrancy of the Ebony as an organization, right?
Agreed. Yes.
So let's get back to 1990. So there you are, and how long are you at the Supreme Court at that point? Or
I am. I was elected in the election of November 1990.
Mm-hmm.
So I took my seat in Queens Supreme Court January 1991.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, my experience was in criminal, and the great demand for judges was in criminal. I can say without fear of contradiction that up to 2/3 of the judges in Queens Supreme Court were assigned to criminal. And you had judges with civil backgrounds dragged kicking and screaming into the criminal term because that's where the demand was. That was the peak of the crack crimes and homicides and everything else. And as I might have mentioned earlier, I was in Long Island City, but we had Supreme Court criminal term parts in all three of the Queens courthouses: Long Island City, Jamaica, and Kew Gardens. And Sutton Boulevard, as you may know from your legal practice, is not designed as a criminal courthouse. I was trying murder cases on the second floor, which had outside windows and no detention pen, and that is absolutely unheard of for trying high-profile cases involving serious charges. But that's what we had to do. They devoted 2 floors in Jamaica alone to criminal cases. So I was assigned to the criminal term then in 1991, and except for some civil experience in the Jamaica courthouse when I was there for 5 years, it was criminal. And my career in the Queens Criminal Court, Supreme Court rather, lasted into 2007. In 2007, I was named the administrative judge of the criminal term of Queens Supreme Court. So I had responsibility for the operation of all the criminal courts, Supreme Court parts in all 3 courthouses. And I served in that position until 2008, when I was designated to the Appellate Division by then Governor Spitzer. So I had a long run in Queens Supreme Court as a trial judge and as an administrative judge.
And then after that?
After that, I was designated to the Appellate Division, and I got there in 2008. And I served there in the Appellate Division as an Associate Justice for 5 years. In 2012, I was designated by Governor Cuomo, Andrew Cuomo, to be the Presiding Justice of the Appellate Division in the Second Department, and I served there until the end of December in 2017, when I retired from the court. I was age 70 then, and as you know, the presiding justices have to step down after they reach age 70. And I decided that I would pursue my original ambition and try my hand in the private sector. So after retiring as a judge after 34 years, I became of counsel to the Meyer Suozzi firm in Garden City. So now I'm in my 4th year having realized my ambition to practice in the private sector.
So you were certainly ahead of your time and waiting for society to get to a point where you finally, well, actually society was ready for you. And
Well, I actually had some very positive experiences as a judge, but I might have left even earlier because I had so much time, of course, in government service. But every time I was thinking about it, along came an opportunity, either an assignment that I liked, a promotion, or a designation to the Appellate Division, which you can't turn down.
right,
So,
right.
so that kept me in government service for a full career.
Right, right, and rewarding, I'm sure, and and also a series of firsts for the Chinese American and the Asian American community.
Yes, I was always aware that in the New York metropolitan area, which is the largest, most significant legal community in the United States, we were so far behind in having Asian Americans in high-profile positions as lawyers or as judges. I became the first Asian American judge in New York State anywhere in 1983. It took that long, 1983. And if you look at the histories of Asian American lawyers in California, Hawaii, elsewhere on the West Coast, there were Asian American judges in the 1950s in those places. So it took a long time for the New York community, the New York legal community, to catch up.
Why do you think that was?
I think it was largely because of the lack of involvement in governmental circles, in politics by Asian Americans. I think they were more savvy in California and in Hawaii earlier on, because all judgeships have political components regarding achieving a judgeship. Of course, in New York State, we have mainly elected judges. That's a political process. Even the appointed judgeships, the Court of Claims judgeships, is a political process. You're appointed by the governor. Federal judgeships, as we all know, require the blessings of U.S. senators and Senate confirmation. That's a political process as well. So in my experience, I've noted that excellent judges can come from both processes, appointed and elective. They can come from either one. And you can get judges who are disappointing in their performance from either source. There is no panacea. I say candidly that there are no purely meritorious appointments. There are no pure meritocracies, I'll put it that way. There are flaws in both, and I personally favor a varied access to the judiciary. There are some people who could never be elected a judge, who should be rightfully appointed, and there are others who are who elected who would never pass muster in the appointment process. It just goes both ways.
Many paths, not just one path.
Oh yes, no, yes, sure. There are multiple paths are ideal because of that. There are some people who very qualified to be judges and have spoken to me about it, but they say they disdain politics. Well, if you disdain politics, you're not going to get the kind of recognition that you need to become a judge. And that is the name of the game. The process is either constitutionally defined or defined by statute. It's the only game in town.
So let me turn now back to Ebony. Ebony is now well over 1,500 members, maybe even 1,600. We're doing a lot of things, and one of the things that I've been able to do through Ebony, I was a co-executive director of a rising tide of hate and violence against Asian Americans in New York City during COVID-19, impact, causes, and solutions. I was a co-executive director with Karen King, who was then at Paul Weiss and is now of counsel at Morvillo. And we've been able to use that as a tool of advocacy and education. As we're talking now in May of 2021, we're in the middle of a wave of anti-Asian violence and harassment because of COVID-19. And that's been one of the things that Ebony's been able to do, in part because we've gotten so big and we have resources. Do you want to talk a little bit about the present day activities leading into maybe what the future can hold for Ebony?
Well, I'm glad that that Ebony has taken on issues that affect the greater society, and not just focused exclusively on issues in the legal community. I think that Ebony has been progressively becoming more involved in those issues. The anti-Asian American violence that we've seen in the last year is certainly something that has to be addressed, and it has to be addressed by people with the organizational and legal sophistication of organizations such as Ebony, because it is multifaceted. It's not just one or two mindless bigots who attack vulnerable Asians. We saw in the last administration the encouragement of divisiveness and the singling out of groups for criticism and for mockery. Those have to be dealt with legally, and they have to be dealt with by encouraging public awareness. And we're in a position, Ebony, other organizations like Ebony are in a position to do that, because as lawyers, we have the ability to articulate the issues and to propose solutions. I have been involved in this. I've been to demonstrations, some of the demonstrations that have occurred as to anti-Asian violence. I see some of the signs. Some of the signs, are appalling that I see. They're well-intentioned, but they don't get the message that I'm speaking of across. You just can't express a message of anger, resentment, and bitterness. You have to get at the root causes of these problems. And I think that one of the root causes is lack of education. Lack of education. We don't have either in our school curriculums enough on Asian American history and the Asian American experience. I saw a comment that was made by a high-ranking Department of Education official touring Stuyvesant High School, saying publicly, "This looks like Chinatown around here." Now, if you've got an attitude like that coming from a leading administrator, then you're going to have an attitude like that perhaps coming from a parent who passes it on to children. All of these things have to be addressed at the grassroots level. It's something that requires an emphasis on the rightful place that Asian Americans have in society, in American society. When I was a child, I was taught or thought that European accents were charming, but Asian accents were laughable and the subject of mockery. And again, those attitudes come from the home. They come from the most basic of sources. I emphasize that Asian American lawyers in particular should be out there in the educational process. I take every opportunity that I can and have to speak at forums. I've spoken in public, in middle and high schools about issues. I did this before the current anti-Asian violence trend emerged over here, just to speak about Asians, their place in American history, and what they're about. How that it's not a monolithic group either. The heritages of Asians is more varied than European heritages. So this is the message that I've been trying to bring across, and that is, as lawyers who are dedicated to upholding the rule of law, we have to be in the forefront of teaching, educating, and demonstrating that you have Asian Americans in the mainstream. Asian American lawyers are only now beginning to be recognized as being mainstream. I don't think that Asian physicians have that same issue. My wife is a physician, and there's certainly, I think, a greater recognition of Asians in healthcare than there are lawyers right now. But our numbers are great enough now where we can make that statement.
Thank you so much. I think there's I think that about sums it up. In terms of sort of where we have been,
yes,
where we're going, and where we would like to go. Thank you for sharing your American story.
Well, you're very welcome, and thank you for taking the time, and thank you for bringing these issues forward, which I think are very important, and they have to continue. I think that the next thing we have to be watchful of is tensions in Asia involving China and the United States, the allies of the United States, the allies of China. That's the next emerging issue of great concern for Asian Americans. And as we know, the bias, the prejudices, the physical assaults are just not limited to those of a certain background. When it comes to anti-Asian tension, it affects all Asians.
That's right. That's right. Well, Judge Randall Eng, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, and I want to thank all the listeners for tuning into this episode of the Historical Society of the New York Courts podcast. For more episodes, please visit our website at history.nycourts.gov. That's history.nycourt.gov. Thank you so much.